I just spent the last couple of weeks watching Squid Game twice. Why would I spend 20 hours watching the same show back to back? For you, of course, and because I wanted to see what I missed the first time through. So I'll be sharing with you all of the foreshadowing I found, as well as a few really interesting character plot points that weren't so obvious the first time through. Let's jump in. Now, it should be obvious, but I'm gonna go ahead and say it so nobody gets mad at me. There are major spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen Squid Game yet, probably shouldn't watch this. All right, kicking things off from the get-go, we have Gi-hoon explaining to us what Squid Game is and how it works, and we're given insight into his desires to be wealthy. When at the end of the scene, he said, "It felt like I owned the entire world." The very next scene, we see Gi-hoon's mother throw some money down for him to buy his daughter a birthday gift. These two things stood out to me because they were clearly setting the stage for how the show is going to be about money, greed, and, well, of course, games. The next two bits of foreshadowing that I found interesting from this first episode took place at the horse race gambling facility. Here we see Gi-hoon struggling on where he wants to place his bets when somebody behind him is yelling at him to hurry up. And this was a nice little preview for the bridge game that we see in episode 7. And after we see Gi-hoon get chased down by a group of thugs that are hoping to collect debts, he's told that they're going to come back and remove his kidneys and eyeballs as a form of repayment, which is something we see a lot of later in the show when the Squid Game workers are seen harvesting and selling body parts of the eliminated Squid Game players. Wrapping things up from the first episode, we're given some pretty clear hints that something is very different about Player 1, or Il-nam, as we later learn in the show is his actual name. First off, we see that he's the only elderly player in the entire group. Then we see him having way too much fun playing red light, green light, which I first interpreted as just a crazy old man having way too much fun, not caring whether he lived or died in this game because he's already lived a full life. But of course, as we now know, I don't think he actually would have ever died in any of these games. Potentially the bridge game had he made it that far, but I'm not sure he ever intended to. So yeah, he was just legitimately enjoying himself in the moment. Also in this image, it looks as if the motion sensor is programmed to ignore Player 1, as he isn't in the same shade of green as the rest of players when they're being scanned. Okay, on to episode 2, which is where I think a lot of viewers struggled because the pace really slowed down. But after a second look, there is a lot to learn from in this episode. First off, Minyo had me super confused. I remember the scene where there was a woman pleading to leave because she had a baby that she hadn't even had a chance to name yet. I just didn't realize on my first time through that this was the same character. It was very interesting to see her go from begging for her life to voting to stay in the game because she saw how much money was at stake. I guess she didn't really care about her kid after all. The next thing that stood out to me was Il-nam's tie-breaking vote. We now know he wanted to take part in the game, so why would he vote to end them? I believe it's because he was actually a relatively decent person and he didn't want to force people to be there and play through the games that didn't want to be there. Of course, we later see him speaking to Gi-hoon about coming back, which begs the question, was Gi-hoon special or important to Il-nam all along? Why did he choose to seek out and persuade Gi-hoon and nobody else? It certainly appeared that Il-nam saw some type of potential that he didn't see in anybody else, and placed special attention on that relationship. Speaking of special people, you know who's special? You are for watching this video. Thank you for being here. Click that like button if you're enjoying this, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Let's get back to it! Another interesting takeaway from this episode is the dynamic between Sang-woo and Ali at the convenience store. We see Sang-woo willfully sharing his cell phone and giving Ali a bus fare, which would make it seem that Sang-woo, as long as there's not large sums of money involved, is a decent person. Also, this ramen looks delicious. Finally, this episode had possibly the most amount of foreshadowing out of any of the episodes in the show. We see many of these characters dealing with things in their real life, and these events essentially tell us how these characters' deaths are going to unfold in the Squid Game. First off, we see Ali stealing what he feels he's owned from his boss, and is later betrayed by Sang-woo, who steals his marbles. Next, we see Sae-byok threatening to slash a man's throat, and is later killed by Sang-woo, who of course cuts her throat. Then we see Dok-soo jumping off of a bridge to avoid being killed by gang members, and later dies after falling off the glass bridge. And lastly, we see Sang-woo attempting to take his own life, and later kills himself in order for Gi-hoon to win the game and take care of his mother. In episode 3, Sang-woo apparently is miraculously healed in his eyesight because he doesn't wear glasses anymore for the rest of the show. In episode 4, it becomes clear that the wall art depicting all of the games that are being played has actually been there the entire time. I was trying to figure out up to this point if they were adding wall art as each episode went on, but it became pretty clear to me that they were all there all along, just largely covered up by bunks that we couldn't see past. Because we spend so much time in this room during this episode, we're able to see a lot of the wall art that is fully unveiled later on in the show. Also in this episode, we're given more insight into Il-nam. Players were allowed to kill each other up until Il-nam shouts to put an end to it, at which point it's promptly put to an end. I don't know about everyone else, but this really didn't even register to me the first time through, but going back the second time, it was very obvious that the front man took Il-nam's words as orders to break things up. Jumping to the climax of the show, episode 6 was, you guessed it, twice as hard to watch the second time around. Now, I have a theory that Sang-woo quickly chose Ali not because he thought he was the best partner, but because he knew the game would actually require him taking on his partner, and he didn't want to have to do so with Gi-hoon at this point. We later see Sang-woo begging Ali and reminding him that he gave him a bus fare, as if that's enough reason for Ali to sacrifice his life for Sang-woo. And then of course I was forced to re-watch the heartbreaking death that occurred at the end of this episode. Seeing Ali die the first time was incredibly sad. The second time just really made me hate Sang-woo with an intense passion. I'm sure this was obvious to most, but for the first time we only hear someone dying and we don't actually see it. This is of course because we know Il-nam was not actually killed in this scene because of his return later in the show. It was this moment during my first time through that I finally realized something was up with Il-nam since we didn't see him get shot. Maybe I'm a bit slower than the average person. And we come to episode 7, where what has been largely a fascinating, amazing, well-written and well-acted show takes a very bad turn. We get to meet the VIPs. Yay. Now, I've heard that there's some intentionality behind how bad these characters were. Some say it's a bit of payback for how Americans portray people from other countries. Regardless, these actors were just garbage. And I can tell you, watching it a second time, it was a challenge. Also in this episode, we see the back of the organizer of these games as he removes his mask and sets it down on the table. It was pretty clear to me the first time, and even more so the second time, that this is the same hand that had just given Gi-hoon his marbles in the previous episode. For me, there really wasn't much else that stood out in this show the second time through beyond this point. The remainder was simply a playing out of the major plot points and the things that were foreshadowed earlier on in the show. That said, there were certainly some things left unfinished that I plan on discussing in a future episode about my predictions for Season 2 of Squid Game. That's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.